Hi, welcome to the Volteface Podcast. I'm Paul North, and today I'm very lucky to be joined by Dr Giulia Zampini. Hi, Julia. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for inviting
No
me.
worries. We've not done one of these in ages because of coronavirus, and we've never done a podcast that is also on video. So we're setting a trend.
Yeah, you can see my room as well.
You've got a good you've got a serious little speaker set up, a little mix table.
Yeah. I thought it would be topical.
You can tell that you're into People and Dancefloors. How many
Yeah,
times has
that's
that room
right.
turned into a dance floor?
Well, over the course of lockdown, quite a bit. It's just me
Just-
and my records.
you just charging around.
Yeah,
Need,
pretty
needs
much.
must. Needs must. Thanks for coming on, and we sort of spoke maybe a month or so ago, and we have some like interesting crossover, I guess. You're a senior lecturer in criminology. I studied criminology, obviously not to your level, but I studied it. And you're at Greenwich Uni. I live in Greenwich. You have an interest and passion around people and dance floors, similar to myself, and area of interest very similar with Volteface. And also, you are aware of the work of Jonathan Haidt and Righteous Minds. And I think I was doing a talk, and you reached out after the talk. Well, you attended the talk, then we had a chat after. So interesting crossover. But I'm interested to know like what got you into this space and what got you interested to kind of achieve the level that you have as a doctor.
Mm. Yeah, so I guess like yourself, I started off um, volunteering in drug services. Obviously, you were working in drug services and harm reduction. And I discovered that after volunteering with Transform Drug Policy Foundation when I was a student. And at the time, I wasn't even studying criminology. I was just interested in, I guess, some of the injustices and harms that the kind of prohibition framework that we live under has produced. And when I was younger, and certainly still now, I've always been passionate about club culture, rave culture, and always been a part of it since I was in my late teens. So obviously, I guess marrying the two things together and experiencing harm reduction and the work that services were doing at the time, whilst also feeling quite privileged in my own experiences. Being somebody that attended raves, but also was quite middle class, quite educated, and therefore didn't necessarily have to endure any particular stigma about, either drug use or raving at the time. And yeah, so all of those things really got me into it. And then I ended up applying for a PhD program with Professor Alex Stevens, who at the University of Kent, who is very interested in, amongst other things, the use of evidence in policy. So that's what my PhD was about, the use of evidence in drug policy and prostitution policy as well. And that's how I got into, I guess, drug policy and interviewing uh, experts of different varieties, so academics, advocates, and just thinking about harm reduction, thinking about the use of evidence and or the
Yeah.
lack of
Well,
evidence in drug
that's
policy.
wicked. That's such a cool. It's such a cool subject to look at, and I'd be interested to hear from you what you've found or what are your kind of key takeaways from that. Like, I guess what's the top line? You know, how much evidence is used in that respect?
It's a very good question. Um, let's say that that's how I got into Jonathan Haidt and the whole kind of discussions around morality. In part because what I started to observe when I was talking to people who were trying to influence policy, was that uh, people tended to kind of have this view that their side was evidence based and the other side was very moralistic in their stance or in their kind of pursuit of policies and interventions. And it also tended to be the case that kind of maybe more liberal or left leaning people thought that they were more evidence based than their kind of right counterpart. And so that kind of opened up a whole new ways of thinking for me about, to what extent these whole domain is a minefield really of different kind of moral positions and how we can work with different moral positions, because it's not necessarily that one side doesn't use evidence at all. It's just that there are different types of evidence or different types of information that are more important to one side or the other, depending on what they care about most, for example. And also, not all sides and not all people understand and can access evidence the same, either because of education or because of how much they value evidence in their own conceptualization of and understandings of reality and of what matters. So all of those things were part of the discussion.
Excellent. I immediately find that like a really interesting area to think about and talk about, because I found a similar thing from coming from drug treatment. I guess I was quite naive, even though I'd done a degree in criminology and worked in treatment for so long. Like I came into policy and I thought, I kind of just assumed that you would just show people evidence and that would kind of work. Do you know what I mean? You'd be like, oh, so I guess political lobbying engagement is just about like pointing people towards the evidence. But then I quite quickly, thankfully, realised that obviously doesn't work. And I was like, oh man, it's actually just like drug treatment, because that doesn't work in drug treatment either. You can't just show a heroin user evidence that their leg's going to fall off if they keep using heroin. That doesn't change their mind. Like, it needs to be way more thought out from that. And then I went from that journey into like examining and looking at what was being said in the reform space and what had gone on historically, reading things like Jonathan Haidt. And then I don't know about you, but it gave me it gave me a real feeling of frustration that this message and this kind of dialogue and conversation doesn't happen more. Like, I don't know what your reaction was to kind of exploring that information, because I'm kind of assuming that from what you've said, that a lot of your analysis kind of highlighted that, unfortunately, often people do end up creating a them and us camp, and it's like, oh, you're kind of right wing, you just don't understand. And the other way around, but we're talking about drug reform, so this is relevant. Like, the left wing advocates kind of look at the right and go, you just don't get it, you're just kind of evil, and evil people wouldn't understand this issue. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely spot on, and that's very much the same as what you're describing is the same frustration that I went through, and I guess finding that on top of the division that is kind of a political division, there's also a certain the debate also happens in a very adversarial fashion. So, especially with experts and scientists saying, or by nature of their expertise and their kind of, they can make superior knowledge claims, and therefore they can make the other person that they're debating feel inferior or stupid or just not sufficiently informed, and create and through that sort of dynamic they can alienate people.
Yeah.
Because maybe they use words that are not accessible to people or concepts that are not accessible to people, and also by sort of creating a kind of bubble of evidence informed discussion and excluding the kind of more gut driven or kind of like experience driven or idea driven kind of debate or discussion.
I think that's such a crucial point, not even outside of like the drug reform space as well. And like, I think people look at the sort of like past 5-8 years of global politics and they can't quite work it out. People will be like, Brexit just doesn't make any sense. It was just like people that were stupid and versus people who like kind of understood how important Europe is. Things like that. And then Trump, they look at Trump and they're like, I don't understand why Trump's in charge. People must be stupid. And it's this set, people aren't learning other that kind of like. And I think, again, I'm not pointing fingers at either side. I think it's more of a human condition than a left versus right thing. But there's been loads of kind of, I think the left has swung so far into that quite mightier than thou, we know, we've done the research, we've got the evidence, you just don't get it sort of way of interacting with people, that I think so many people just switched off and just thought, I'm not engaging with those messages. I don't know, it's a point outside of drug reform, but like, I do think that is become quite a complex nature of the world. Everybody's got access to so much information. It's kind of a different ball game, isn't it, when you try to shift and change public opinion? But I've not thought about I don't think I've thought enough. I'm glad you've mentioned that, because I don't think I've thought enough about that sort of like quite righteous position that people sometimes form. And I know they form that position with good intention. You know, I have studied this for years. I'm an expert in XYZ. I've got that title. Like, and they're good people with good hearts that don't like harm. Like, they're not bad people at all. But I've not thought enough about how sometimes that the language and the dialogue and the intervention of that's presented to those groups feels a bit like, I don't know, immediately just puts people on the back foot, doesn't it, and kind of rubs them up the wrong way.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking about it a lot. I gave a talk a while ago about trying to think about why kind of populist politics and messages are so appealing to people. And I was thinking about how often scientific debate and language it relies way too much on rationality and not enough on kind of mobilizing emotions, and obviously how that can be detrimental then to having a properly informed political debate. Because I think a lot of the appeal of populist politics and messaging and construction of news and information is that it mobilizes people's simple emotions, and it appeals to people because it is universally accessible. It is, it's instinctively validated in people, and so
Definitely. And you see that. I mean, you see that with the Trump issue, and you see that with, I think you see that with drug reform, in some ways, because I think those messages that people that are against drug reform have used are quite, they just cut straight to that fear, don't they? They just get straight to the point. Whereas I think sometimes the left wing messages around drug reform become very convoluted and quite, do you know what I mean? Like it doesn't quite cut through to that like core emotion that I think sometimes people on the right are feeling, around reform and their fears. So what do we do about it then? I mean, I guess I'm in agreement. I think it's a fascinating subject. I think it's a huge problem in this space. I'm shocked at I'm kind of shocked at the level by which it exists, and I don't know if I've gone too far with it, but I'm often very critical of just like the echo chambers that everybody forms on Twitter and stuff, and just how cliquey it all becomes, and yeah, I find that a huge problem. But in your experience and your knowledge and your research, what are the solutions?
It's a really good question. I don't think I've got a kind of one size fits all solution and kind of model. But I guess what I'm trying to do, and I can't say whether it's going to be successful or not yet because it's sort of early days, is to kind of make more room for, storytelling and people's experiences to exist at least alongside, if not in a primary position, together with the more kind of evidence-based academic discussion, and so and also I guess contemporaneously to use academic platforms to provide space for people's stories to be told and to be understood as a way of making evidence-informed and experience-based discussions accessible and invite people in through a different form, a different content, a different language that maybe isn't adversarial and isn't exclusive and isn't, I don't know, ivory tower. And I guess that's that's kind of the foundation for me of the People and Dancefloors project, or what we're trying to do with the People and Dancefloors project.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I think that's when you kind of sent that info over to us and I had a look, it really chimed with me around some of the things you're saying of kind of trying to shake up the way in which people think about and hear messages around drug reform. So and just to and before we go into that, just to rewind, I think something you said alluded to like a phrase that's always stuck with me from I was at Tory Party conference. I don't know when it was, maybe the last one or the one before, I can't remember. And I was at an event, I was speaking to Mike, not the police and crime commissioner, the inspector from Durham. His name will come to me in a second.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's Mike. That'll really annoy him that I've forgotten his name. But he's an incredible guy. And I said to him, like, how did you achieve so much in Durham? Like, how did you turn that police force around to have such a liberal positive approach in the drug reform space, and he was like, "Oh, three things: stories, myths, and legends." I didn't give him academic papers. I didn't give him research reports. I just told them stories, myths. I told them stories. I created myths and I created legends. That was it. That's how I changed their opinion. And and I was like, "Oh man, you're great. You're in the dream job. You're the perfect person for that job," because he recognised that like it wasn't about he'd read the evidence and understood the evidence. And he read and understood the evidence in a calm, considered position as a natural liberal. And then from learning that, he was like, right, now I know that's true. Rather than just using that, how do I bring these people on a journey? And yeah, that stories, myths and legends has always stuck with me as such an effective way of thinking about, right, what works, what changes people's opinions. And the same was true in drug treatment. You know, and this is where drug treatment gets a bit confusing, because you'd speak to someone that you'd been seeing for years and you'd done like every intervention, you'd done CBT, you'd done motivation interviewing, literally you tried everything, they'd done group work, they'd done 12-step, and then they'd stop and you'd be like, what was it? And they'd be like, it would just be like a narrative based situation or issue that they wouldn't say, oh, it was 2.5 years of really intense treatment and talking therapies. I'm not saying that didn't help, of course it did, but it would just be like, do you know what it was? It was my mate Steve, who he just said to me one time, and they'll have just said something really profound to them, and they'll grab onto that. We have this natural, like, I don't know, just affinity with stories, don't we? Yeah. So just sorry, just sidetracking slightly, but how did this lead to People and Dancefloors, and gives a bit of an overview of the aims of that project?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, what you were saying is like the relational proximity is like the difference between knowing, a number, or quoting a number, and then, just being told a story about one person that's representative of that number, and how that story can mobilize emotions and can, create a sense of shared empathy, shared humanity. And so I think it's just a lot easier for people to cotton on to that sort of information. And I think I should say I owe it to some of the participants from my previous research who I guess allowed me to understand how stories were important in the context of drug policy reform, particularly in Australia, where, for example, the kind of family relations of people in power had been important for people to emotionally understand the struggles of drug use and drug addiction, or how, for example, I think it's called Families for Drug Reform, Australian organization that's been going on for a long time, using, it's like a bit like Anyone's Child in the UK, I guess, just using, personal stories of loss to, and using that kind of universal concept of the family to try to communicate to people about drug policy reform. So yeah, so I owe it to all of these things. But I think with People and Dancefloors, it was a series of things, trying to put the stories of people center stage through film, because obviously film is something that cuts right through to the person. And if you've got the camera there up close, you feel like you can relate with that person, like that person is talking to you. And the level of mediation is almost non-existent. I mean, it's still there, but it's less. So that is the medium that I wanted to use for communicating the research, the interviews that we've done with people. And I should say that it involves really people's relationship with dance floors and drugs, and that people talk quite openly about their relationship with drugs in the context of dance floors and more generally in kind of social and music context.
We need more of this.
That's because
we need. Sorry to interrupt, but we need that. That is such a missing thing, and that makes it even harder when it comes to reform, doesn't it? Because like if you've got less people being open and honest about relationships with drugs, you result in policies like Sean Bailey's policy of suggesting like, let's what we really need to do is drug test the city. Like, are you in like Sean, they're all Sean, they're all taking coke. Like, just FYI. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's pretty prevalent.
I
But
mean, you literally have like probably like half the workforce would be out.
the stock, yeah. What would happen if that policy was enacted? Basically, the country would go bankrupt because the stock
Yeah.
exchange wouldn't work for a day. They'd all be like, no one's in, nothing's happening. You know what I mean? We can't manage the stocks. Great, thanks, Sean. You just crashed the UK's economy. I mean, I do literally think you would, if they enacted that policy to its full, companies wouldn't be able to function. But it's born out of that lack of recognition that there are loads of affluent city workers that take loads of coke. Sorry to jump in, because I know you're.
No.
There's not enough of it.
That's exactly it. And I think that there's loads of stories about people's positive relationship to some drugs in some contexts which are missing from the public domain, from discussions, from research. So I think there is a kind of a gap in in discussions about these kind of more positive stories, and also I guess not just positive stories but just more complex stories, which are not just positive or negative, which can be a bit of both, and also the I guess that there is that fear of consequences. What would it mean for a person who has a very functional and lifestyle, who was fulfilled and happy, to come out about their drug use, whether they are very privileged or maybe not so privileged, but regardless, what would be the consequences of that in terms of our understandings with drugs and people, maybe potentially even our drug policies. Like, could it be that some of the kind of, stereotypical views, some of the more kind of, some of the more outdated and old-fashioned ideas, slowly give way to something else, something, more realistic and complex, maybe. So that's kind of what we're interested in. And of course, the other side is to create avenues and platforms for drug user voices to become more central in debates about drug policy, because of course, these are the people that are most affected by drug policy, so they should be front and center, I think, of debates and of discussions, whether they in the public domain or in a kind of more political domain of debating policies and implementation and interventions. And so
definitely, 100% agree. So I guess how is the project working and how's it function? That's kind of its aim and kind of how you come around to starting it. But what does it look like?
So at the moment, the original idea was to make a series of films, and each film would be looking at slightly different themes, and then those themes would and then the films would be screened in different contexts, obviously universities, but also community contexts, to try to spark some debate, generate debate, and universities obviously have been good to us in terms of like being welcoming and being a place where students and academics could come together and debate these issues. But I think also in the community, we had parents come to see the film and saying, actually, this is great because I could actually have a conversation with my son or my daughter about their drug use and understand their perspectives and their position a little bit better, and not be fearful of asking questions, and them not being fearful of providing honest answers. So all of that sort of stuff was the plan. And we made one film, and then we screened it a couple of times, and then COVID happened, so we had to readjust.
Bloody COVID.
And try to, I know, it's just been a bit, it's put a spanner in the works to a lot of different projects, I guess. But
it's people can watch it. It's on YouTube, right? I'll put a link.
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
I'll put a link under the description.
We have a website, www.peopleanddancefloors.com. The film is on the website. Obviously, I guess in part because of COVID, we started really trying to engage people through via the website. We're doing podcasts, doing, writing, contributing to the blog, just to kind of monitor, I guess, what was happening in general in terms of the relationship between people and dance floors. I guess during COVID, illegal raves happening, trying
Yeah.
to counter that kind of demonization of young people that happened as a result of them partying during the pandemic and so on. We try to kind of keep the discussions going. But yeah, going back to the film, sorry, I
So I know it's
divulged
good.
into something else. Going back to the film is, that I guess the main themes of this first documentary, which is very short, is 25 minutes long. We tried to document the relationship between um, people and dance floors and asked them what dance floors meant to them and why they were important in their lives. And then we asked them what the kind of position, the place of drugs was within that. And people talk about drugs as enhancement, as something that enhances their experiences of drugs, of dancing and music, but also social experiences, their ability to make friends with strangers and build connections, which sometimes can be very long lasting, and therefore feel also more free to express themselves, which we thought was a kind of
Mm.
positive in terms of socializing and mental health. And we also talk about in the film, it's something that the participants really stress in the interviews that we've done. I guess the kind of hypocrisy around the cultural relationship of the UK with alcohol versus other drugs. So how much alcohol is glorified and encouraged, and indeed people who don't use alcohol are often thought of as
Yeah.
strange and weird versus the way in which I guess people can't talk about their use of other
Yeah.
drugs, such as I guess most often ecstasy, psychedelics, and cocaine in these contexts. Yeah, and that was a big part of the
How,
discussion as well.
sorry.
And
No, no, no.
finally,
Go on.
sorry,
Keep going. Keep going. I'll jump in after. I'll remember it. Sorry.
yeah, the final, I guess, theme of the film was about drugs and identity, and particularly disclosure. So how, whether people are comfortable talking about their drug use and who they talk to about their drug use. And of course, not all the participants were comfortable enough to speak on camera, because obviously they wanted. Some of them were worried about the consequences that this might have on their reputation, on their job, and so on. So obviously, some of the participants have kind of written some statements to contribute to the project. Others have just done kind of audio interviews, so just voice. But some really brave souls have spoken about their drug use on camera, and within the context of those other themes. So it's not just about drug use, and it's not about glorifying drug use either. It's just kind of like an honest discussion about the place of that in their lives and in their
Yeah. And that
experiences.
go.
So yeah.
Going back to what we were talking about previously, like in terms of you could write books, and people have make a living from it, writing books about the failures of our current drug policies and how they're not good enough, and you could do years and years of academic research on it. But nothing, in some ways, nothing will beat someone who uses MDMA or coke. Like a lawyer, maybe someone from the city, just saying, it's fine. I do use it, but I'm all right. It's fine, and not trying to preach, not trying to tell someone that they're wrong. That kind of narrative and dialogue is just so missing, isn't it? And certainly when coming from the treatment world, where I would do public events, talking to people about drugs, and I'd try and battle stigma. I'd go to community events where people be complaining about our service, and like people kicking off in the street and things like that. And like it, you could see why they were kicking off, because there were some lively things going on, like caused by people who were very unwell and like vulnerable. But yeah, there were still
Mm.
like people just wandering into shops and like just causing chaos in shops. So I get it. But when it came to me kind of talking to them about, look, the service isn't just for those groups. There are loads of just people that that would surprise you, and they'd be like, it just wouldn't resonate. Do you know what I mean? It wouldn't click with them because they're not seeing it. It's not in front of them. But I think if that was more of a dialogue and people, people like Sean Bailey, I think Sean knows deep down because I've met him. I think he knows deep down what he's doing with those policies. He's galvanising a base. But like, I think if people could just see the normalisation of drug, have it normalised and it doesn't affect people as they imagine. It's such a powerful message. It's back to that stories thing. It's such a powerful story to change people's opinions.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously, there are other people who, from within academia, that are kind of making the argument. Like most famously, Carl Hart has made the argument repeatedly, and he's just got a book out which kind of makes that very argument. And I think particularly the power of people who have some degree of privilege to speak about their drug use more honestly, to try to counter that narrative that drug use is only a problem within a certain group of people that are poor and that commit crime, that fund their drug use and so on and so forth. But I think still people kind of make this distinction because it's a class-based kind of hierarchy-based distinction and disdain that people have for a certain group of people, like the more problematic drug users, who and so they, in their mind, they distinguish that which is publicly problematic from the kind of private drug use, which is not an issue, and therefore I think that distinction between kind of private and public morality is very much something that characterizes has characterized policies around moral issues for a long time
I agree completely. But to throw this out there, I don't know whether this your thoughts on this or if this is a bit too out there with it. But my frustration sometimes with the sometimes my frustration with the arguments around reform is we then get too lost. Like for me, we often miss the nuance and find like a sensible line in the middle. And the argument of like, loads of people do use drugs and they don't have a problem is absolutely true. And those stories and narratives are really important and we should definitely advocate for those. But I then find myself back to being frustrated again when those arguments go so far. And like there's some characters on Twitter who just literally they may as well just call their Twitter account same tweet different day, and they just tweet the same tweet every day. Do you know what I mean? Oh, there's loads of them, and they get loads of followers because people love just reading something that they agree with. So they just tweet the same thing. I'm not going to start slanging people off without them having a voice because I don't think it's fair. But like they'll just keep saying the same thing over and over again, and these things that they say are based upon that liberal, that quite left-leaning position that it's not the drugs, it's the environment. It's not the drugs, it's a social class. It's not the and that then frustrates me again. And like Dr. Carl Hart, obviously he's mega famous drug lord, millions of fans, or whatever. But like that argument that winds me up again because I feel like they go so far, the discredit that they I then don't know how they can consider themselves to have a nuanced position because. Yes, of course, people that have experienced deprivation or come from poorer communities, of course, their version of a problematic drug use is going to be way worse than someone with a level of affluence. Do you know what I mean? Of course, like it's kind of common sense, basic baseline criminology. But then it irritates me when we then lose the nuance of like, but that doesn't mean that drugs aren't problematic or dangerous, and that we shouldn't address the concerns around drugs, because I think going back to the sort of Jonathan Haidt stuff, that you then have social conservatives, or not even just social conservatives, people that don't agree with that position, who hear that and go, what, you're telling me that heroin is not dangerous and actually it's just the individual and the person? And like I know that in itself is a debate and a discussion because we prescribe heroin in hospitals in form of diamorphine, etc., etc. Then insert more people's work, but like I then feel like we in the reform world, we end up having conversations around what reform should look like that completely lack nuance, and all of a sudden we'll lump in coke in with, MDMA, cannabis, and alcohol, and we're comparing all the same things. So like, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but that I find that frustrating. It's the same with alcohol. The thing I mentioned previously is, use Professor Nutt's work in lectures, seminars, workshops, all sorts of things up and down the country for years, but that line going back to like alcohol, alcohol is safe, alcohol is worse than cannabis, so we should legalize cannabis, and in theory cocaine is not as bad as cannabis, so we should legalize cocaine. We're then back in this like completely unnuanced position where you find yourself if you follow that line to its, if you hold that as your key position, you end up trying to have a debate with someone saying a line of cocaine is safer than alcohol. And that is just that seems, I don't know, sorry, I'm going on a rant, but what these people do is they remove all the context, and the only context they leave on the table is social class and deprivation, and then they go, look, it's not drugs, it's this, and it's like, but you've removed so much content that of course you're going to feel like you're right, but if you bring all that stuff back in, it's back to being a bit more murky again. I don't know what your thoughts are on that ramble.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, there is lots of discussion about the death of nuance, and I think obviously it's not helped by, a particular type of social media interaction where you have quite limited, for example, number of words through which you can express yourself and your points. And sometimes, some of the loudest voices that repeat the same line over and over again are also the ones that tend to do better in terms of popularity and in terms of appeal. So, and they tend maybe to silence the kind of people that are trying to maybe make more nuanced or complex arguments. So there is that problem. And I think that, I understand where people are coming from when they try to, make the argument about class and deprivation over and over again, because I feel like, if you have, particularly when you have a kind of political ideology and political structure that verges towards the right, and that has, and the legal system that emphasizes individual responsibility over and above sort of social responsibility or more shared responsibility. I think that people are trying to kind of rebalance that by sort of making the argument about deprivation, social structure over and over and over again. But of course, when it comes down to it, and when it comes down to thinking about reform, thinking about solutions, thinking about how do we move forward, we need to be able to have to build a kind of debating table where there's lots of different voices that create a complex and nuanced discussion where all those voices become complementary. So not just the loudest voices get heard, but there is a kind of complementarity of views that hopefully comes together in a meaningful way when it comes down to reform, which that at least that's my hope.
Yeah, no, I agree. I guess I was talking to someone about this in the team today, but like I think it's really important because earlier we were talking about like how would we change some of these things, and I wish whenever I find myself talking to people about drug policy in the field, I try and get the message across of like it's don't work in this space thinking I want to be popular. Think about in this space being like I want to make a difference, and being the popular thing is saying the same thing over and over again to the same people and getting loads of people to like you and loads of people to retweet you and just keep owning that thing. And I agree with your point that in some ways it comes out of like frustration of like there's truth in that, and seeing the harm it from working in treatment for 9 years, it really winds you up. Like watching people die that you've known for years is a horrendous experience. It's not cool. Nothing about it is nice, and it drives you to see the world in a particular way. But like I think if we really want to make a difference in this space and we really want to stop people dying, fundamentally the discomfort that people have to find is that you've got to work with a system that you might not like. Do you know what I mean? You might not like the current system, because you highlighted a few things there which are a reflection of like criminal justice system or individual responsibility, dominant right-leaning ideologies over personal responsibility, over left-leaning ideologies of shared responsibility, communities, more of a community response or a state's responsibility. But like that ain't it. That ain't what's out there. So it's back to like, would you want to just play this game where you just imagine an amazing world for you and you just keep saying things to try and create your fantasy world, or do you want to stop people dying? Because if you want to stop people dying, you've got to get out of Disney and come back to the world you don't like, and you've got to try and think about, well, how do I engage the people that are in power? And if your answer is work with them collaboratively, then do that. But if your answer is have a revolution, then you're not. What winds me up, and where I'm getting a bit animated and stressed about it, but like what winds me up is drug reform is not an excuse to have a revolution. Or do you know what I mean? It's drug reform. And it stresses me sometimes that I haven't really talked about this so publicly like this, so hopefully this doesn't cause too much carnage, but like it stresses me out that like I feel like drug reform, because of its naturally left-leaning dominance for years, and as a liberal, as someone who leans left, I'm all for those arguments that are raised, but I feel like it's become the ideal battleground to talk about kind of like, we need a revolution, we need to change our social system, we need to implement models for cannabis legalization or whatever else that are like nothing else, and that like that we're back. I feel like we're back in fantasy land again. Do you know what I mean? If you want, we can't do that. And to me, drug reforms sometimes feels that ideology gets in the way of like actually dealing with drug reform. Personally, I don't know if I thoughts on that. I feel like I'm
Yeah, I
putting
was
you on the
just
spot
thinking
as well.
about
I'm
this.
like, do you agree?
Nah, not at all.
'Cause if you do, I've said it.
Not at all. Like,
So you
no, I can totally empathize, and I feel your frustration, and I totally understand where you're coming from. I mean, I think there's two issues there. One is also about kind of the fact that many people that work in drug reform also operate and think about different, I guess, have a broader kind of politics, or broader kind of political base that also is informed by particular ideologies, and they can't keep those out when engaging with drug reform proper. So all of those other beliefs will filter through in their ways of understanding and expressing themselves about drug reform. And I don't think people can necessarily control that very easily, but maybe some people can. And obviously, there's also the question of egos, like
Yeah.
people who are big egos, or want to kind of, or are using social media to express themselves as their own platform, rather than also using it to platform other people or other views. So there is that obviously going on as well. And yeah, it's weird. Like, I spent ages thinking about how can we understand um, the positions and core beliefs in a way that is not kind of like a binary in terms of the political spectrum, like liberal and conservative, but more like a more complex model, like a matrix, where people would sort of like be positioned differently depending on whether they're kind of libertarians who support kind of liberal economic policies, or whether they are kind of really left leaning in terms of economic policies, but then they're really socially conservative in terms of their kind of moral policy, around moral policies. And so there's so much, there are so many different positions even in the drug policy reform world, that is so, I think it's difficult for people to kind of agree on this is the way
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
But I agree with you that fundamentally people should think about how can we make a difference in the
Yeah.
here and now,
It,
and
it,
what tools can we
Yeah, it
develop.
should be about what's actually achievable, not what you want to see happen. I mean, we can all live in la la land and say like wild things, but I still think it has to be in the realms of like what is achievable and what is possible. And also like drug reformers, we should step outside of the kind of social, not like sociology, criminology world, and speak to psychology. I know criminology and psychology, sociology are all interlinked in many respects, but like speak to psychologists around human condition and human behaviour. Speak to people in marketing around consumer choice, and it's this kind of snobbery that's frustrated me from coming into the space, in which if you're in that space, you kind of say, oh, you're a bit right wing, you don't really understand. But if you're interested in drug reform, you should absolutely be speaking to people who understand markets and what markets work. Like how on earth can you proclaim to be an advocate for drug reform and interested in drug reform if you don't understand the nature of like the human condition when it comes to the procurement and marketing and advertising and buying things? Like there has to be a recognition. If you're making recommendations, things like legalizing cannabis, it's also got to be fun. It's also got to be a good experience that like works for the customer, not just for social justice and social equity issues.
Yeah, I think here you're talking about this disciplinary silos and how people are, in a way, they've got blinkers on, or whatever they're called.
Yeah, blinkers. Yeah.
In terms of, yeah, okay, they, because they're so used to thinking about their subject, and they can only go to the boundaries of their subject. So, for example, of course, criminologists will look at markets, but they look at criminogenic
Yeah.
markets. They look
Yeah.
at and so they will only look at certain types of markets, which obviously are maybe some of the most harmful markets out there that exist. And so it's difficult to, I think, come out of that kind of deep, disciplinary-based knowledge, and adopt a different
Yeah.
view that's informed by different disciplinary expertise. And of course, I wish that happened more. More like cross-disciplinary discussion across across the spectrum, and even subjects that are traditionally from within the criminology field to be looked at by you know business and marketing people, or like psychologists and so on, just to just get out of those
Yeah,
loops
100%.
of
I think like drug reform shouldn't be a thing that's just owned by those groups and academics, and it should be about listening to people outside of those bubbles, and it's why I find this chat so interesting. I'm so glad, we've started speaking, because going back to the point we're making earlier, that those kind of silos that people create, and that kind of like, well, we're the criminologists, so like we understand drug, we've got the answers to drug reform. I think that, not that all criminologists are like this. There's incredible, amazing, and you're incredible, amazing criminologists. There's loads of people doing great work. I'm not, and I've background in criminology. I lecture in criminology at unis. Like, I'm not tying everybody to the same brush, but like, it's so vital that going forward, there's a recognition in the advocacy space that, like, should we legalize cannabis? It's not a question for drug reformers. That's a question for everybody in loads of different sections, and we should be actively engaging other groups, even if we ideologically disagree with them, and saying, what does work? Do you know what I mean? What do we know about people and consumer choice? What do we know about that? And recognizing that the way you describe it as having like limitations on our knowledge, and also like limitations in terms of the way in which we look at things in those silos. But I come back to that question though of like, I'm getting frustrated. I'm really enjoying the chat, but it winds me. I'm going to have to do like a run or something after this, the exercise. But like, what do we do about it? Like, what, like, because why do I not meet more academics like you? Why do I not meet more academics who have that level of nuance, who look at it in this way? Like, where are they?
Well, I think in part it's the sort of tradition and culture of academia, particularly maybe the older school, where disciplinary silos were never crossed, or not often crossed. And I think, for me personally, and with the People and Dancefloors project in particular, I want to work with people from different disciplines. So one of my research partners works in media and communication, working with filmmakers, working with artists, working with as many different types of people as possible. Obviously sharing, similar goals, and a common interest, but also trying to find lots of different ways of communicating, as well as different avenues, research avenues, and the avenues for debate and political discussion that emphasize different aspects of the issue according to interest, expertise, whatever, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. But yeah, so I just think there is I would say a movement, or a move in academia that I can see in some quarters, where people are trying to do transdisciplinary meta stuff, that goes beyond. And I think that's really promising. It's obviously, like, I would say, like a minority, because the whole of the structure of academia is built around disciplinary silos and specialism. The journals are like that. The subject on offer at university for degree level are like that. So it's very much about maybe undoing a system of thinking and trying to get to much more holistic
Definitely.
approaches. Uh, but obviously, of course, also outside of academia, trying to work together in partnership across the board with different, for me, like the ideal future would be with drug reform, would be academics, advocates, users, activists, members of political parties, the police, health authorities,
Yeah.
all of those people working together and having roundtable discussions and trying to come up with, and then having smaller working groups, with representatives from each side, from each organization or whatever, trying to come together with solutions collectively, and then
Yeah.
implementing them. That would be
Yeah,
amazing.
it would be, I think that was like when Volteface was first put together. The point was to go find new voices and get new voices in the debate and try and bring people who traditionally were left out of that discussion into the discussion, even if there are groups that like, you know, completely disagree with drug reform. You know, you got to try and get them around the table and engage them. One thing I was reflecting on today and did a thread about was drug treatment. And drug treatments, I'm so proud of drug treatment of where they've got, and they're way more engaged in the debate now. And like, I ain't one for like claiming credit on stuff. I find it absolute cringe. But like, we worked really hard to get loads of conversations going with that group, because I came from treatment. I was like, right, we've got to start speaking more to drug treatment, and not just us, like loads of all advocacy reform groups, academics need to start speaking to drug treatment, because they've an excellent role to play. They've an excellent conversation to be had. They're really, really valuable organisations to be at the centre of drug reform going forward. And they've, in 4 years, I'm so proud of how involved they are now. You know, they will regularly tweet about drug reform issues and advocate for. You know, when I worked in treatment, we weren't even allowed to have Christmas. Like, this is how conservative they were. You couldn't have Christmas. One manager literally said to us, email goes round, there's no Christmas this year because we don't want to offend anyone. We've got to play things really safe here. Christmas is off. And then I got pulled into a meeting once, and they said they were going to give me a disciplinary because 2 people that worked for me came to a birthday party, which was just a meal. We just went for a meal. Just went for a meal in town. And it was this like conservative kind of they were so fearful. They were so scared of like upsetting commissioners or upsetting government, and you just thought, man, how are these guys going to get involved? But now it's great. They've come really far.
Yeah, I think there's also something to be said about with treatment, with the sector in particular. I think when treatment used to be treatment organizations used to be kind of at arm's length, but like, relatively well funded by government, and they felt like, maybe they were an extension of civil service effectively, so they needed to abide by the same rules. But when they were sort of maybe pushed further away, or indeed, the funding wasn't flowing anymore, maybe that's also something that maybe allowed them to feel like they could take on a bit more of a political advocacy role in order to reclaim their rightful space and rightful place and so on. But
I think they felt threatened. I think they realised the severity of the cuts and they need to do something about it. But I'm on the other hand, I'm critical of them on that front, because I don't think they're future-proofing themselves. I don't think they're setting themselves up for anything beyond the heroin cohort, and I think they're relying on government and society to be perpetually worried about heroin and crack users. It's a declining population numbers-wise. It's a terribly ill population. It absolutely needs supporting, but I just don't think people are. There's certainly not a political issue, and I worry that they're not positioning themselves to be like, right, what does the future? Let's get more cannabis users in, steroid users in. And I'm sure that's going on in isolated things, but they should be doing something more on a national level to raise some of those issues. You know what I mean, and highlight harms and stuff.
For sure. Yeah, I think the treatment services that we've got are they're basically a hangover from the HIV/AIDS epidemic, essentially. So that's what they were created. That's how the sort of first model was developed and devised to respond to bloodborne viruses. And then, of course, there was a bit of leeway in terms of how treatment services could, refashion themselves to respond to other issues to a point. But it's very limited, and I think you're right that there is no future proofing, and there is, and anything that treatment services have done that is innovative, they've done it basically by carving a little bit of space to just try to offer something that was in a slightly different direction. I
agree. But fair play to them for becoming more involved. I know there's lots of people involved in that space who, I think are doing a really good job in highlighting some of those issues. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of they're being. I think you're right that part of them, they felt a bit forced, but they are being brave. They're being much braver than they were. It's very easy to just dodge the drug reform a bit and go, nope, we're not giving anyone for quote. We're not doing it. Nope, stay away. Let's not risk our relationship with the commissioner. Whereas now, I think they're much more proactively going, yeah, we'll definitely engage in this issue. We'll do that TV interview. We'll write a piece for a newspaper. I think they're getting much more positive.
there are so many excellent people that I know that worked in drug treatment or still work in drug treatment. And obviously, my connection was with Bristol Drugs Project, which I
Yeah,
think is an
amazing project. I
excellent
spoke to Sasha the other day actually.
example.
Amazing, great project.
Yeah, yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah, yeah,
I said that we'd do.
yeah.
I was like, yeah, we'll do like 30 minutes, 40 minutes. I've gone way over. But I I just find the conversation so interesting. It's like my favourite thing to chat about is like political ideology and drug reform and politics. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to mention or say or we haven't covered that you wanted to chat about.
Nah, I mean, I could talk about this stuff and forever. Literally, I'm like you, and like we're both obviously quite big talkers, which is good. But yeah,
We'll do a series. We'll
but
just do a series of it. We'll just
yeah, we'll do a
7 part
series
it.
with just the political
The
ideology,
Rambo.
drug policy reform. Awesome. Sign me
Wicked.
up. Yeah, no, just I'd be very keen to know really what people think about the People and Dancefloors project if they have a chance to visit the website to watch the film. We're looking for, I guess, feedback. We're looking for reactions because, as I said, the original aim was to spark debate and have discussions out in the open. So please reach out and let us know what you think if you do have a chance to visit the website www.peopleanddancefloors.com. And other than that, yeah, hopefully we'll be back again with more stuff in the future. Trying to get funding, which is always a fun thing in research. Takes forever. So yeah, we'll see what
Well,
happens.
thanks so much for coming in. I'll put the link to the website in the description below, and whenever we tweet about it, we'll put all the links and stuff. So yeah, if you're watching this now, click it now, check it out.
Yeah, thanks so much for having
No,
me,
thanks for
Paul.
chatting to us. I think you're doing amazing work. I'm a massive fan, and thanks for reaching out and having a good hour-long ramble with me. I really appreciate it. All right,
Thank
and
you
cheers for
again.
watching. Thanks, guys.
Take care. Bye.